The morning sunlight poured through the curtains like an uninvited guest, landing on the empty side of Elena's bed. She lay still, eyes open, her hand resting where another hand used to be. The sheets were cold. They'd been cold for months ever since her husband, Mark, packed his bags and left with words that still echoed in her mind, "I need a real family, Elena. One that can grow." That sentence had rooted itself inside her like a splinter she couldn't pull out. The house, once bright and busy with baby names scribbled on sticky notes, nursery colors debated over takeout, was now eerily tidy. Too tidy. There was no chaos of toys, no laughter, no mess. Only silence, polished and cruel. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're all set to enjoy this story, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'll be dropping another exciting story you're sure to love. Now, let's jump right in. She moved through her morning on autopilot: coffee, news, the ritual of pretending everything was fine. At the small bakery where she worked, she smiled for customers, kneaded dough, dusted sugar over pastries. She was the picture of composure until a mother walked in with a stroller. The sight never failed to cut her open, though she hid it behind politeness. The baby gurgled, and Elena turned away, her fingers trembling on the cash register. At night, she scrolled through photos of couples with newborns. She told herself she was happy for them. That she'd made peace with her fate. But each post chipped away at the wall she'd built between herself and the truth. She was lonely, and she still wanted to be someone's mother. Not out of pity or obligation, but out of love. Across town, Daniel was running late again. The morning routine in his house was less of a schedule and more of a survival drill. Shoes never matched, cereal spilled like confetti, and someone, usually the twins, had misplaced the car keys. The kitchen looked like a hurricane had passed through, but to Daniel, it was home. Loud, messy, exhausting, but alive. "Dad. Ella won't let me use the bathroom." "That's because you take forever," another voice shouted back. "Everybody just," Daniel started, then stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. He'd long given up on being the calm, collected type of father you see in commercials. 5 kids didn't leave room for perfection. Just endurance. By the time he dropped the last one off at school, his shirt was wrinkled, his coffee cold, and his patience threadbare. Yet as he watched his youngest, Lily, wave at him from the school steps, something inside him softened. Her smile reminded him of his late wife, Anna, the warmth she carried even in chaos. It had been 3 years since cancer took her, and still, Daniel hadn't figured out how to stop missing her. He worked construction, long hours that left his hands rough and his back aching. But he kept going because stopping meant thinking, and thinking led to remembering. Grief had become like an old scar, no longer bleeding, but always there when the weather changed. After work, he stopped by the small bakery near the site, a new place he'd noticed but never entered. He wasn't one for sweets, but the sign said homemade bread, and something about the word home tugged at him. As he stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed. Elena looked up from the counter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. For a brief second, their eyes met, 2 strangers, each carrying the quiet weight of loss. Daniel offered a tired nod. She smiled politely, the kind of smile you give when you don't yet know someone's story but feel it anyway. He ordered a loaf, thanked her, and left. But as the door closed behind him, Elena's gaze lingered. There was something in the way he'd looked at her, something weary, familiar, human. Outside, Daniel paused by his truck, the scent of fresh bread warm in his hands. He didn't know why, but he felt lighter, as if that brief exchange had reminded him that the world was still full of small mercies. Inside, Elena wiped the counter and caught herself smiling without reason. Neither of them knew that this fleeting moment, the simplest of transactions, was the start of something that would undo everything they thought they'd lost. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of day that made the whole world feel half asleep. Elena opened the bakery early, humming softly as she arranged croissants in neat rows. Business was slow on rainy days, but she didn't mind. The rhythm of her hands working dough had become her quiet form of prayer. She was wiping down the counter when the doorbell jingled again. The same man from yesterday stepped in, jeans damp from rain, hair wind-tousled, a little out of breath. He gave a quick, apologetic smile as he tried to wrangle an umbrella and a little girl clinging to his leg. "Sorry," he said, chuckling under his breath. "We're a bit of a storm today." The girl peeked out from behind him, wide-eyed and shy. "Daddy, can I have the chocolate one?" she whispered. Elena's heart gave a small, involuntary squeeze. "Of course," she said gently. "What's your name?" "Lily," the little one said, her voice like a bell. "That's a beautiful name." Elena leaned over the glass counter, sliding a muffin into a napkin. "Here you go, Lily. On the house." Daniel frowned slightly. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said quickly. "Rainy days deserve kindness." He hesitated, then smiled. "Thank you. That's rare these days." As they spoke, Elena noticed the exhaustion etched into his face, the faint lines of someone who'd carried too much for too long. There was no ring on his finger, only a pale band of skin where one had been. Something inside her recognized the story his silence told. He bought a loaf of bread again, but when he reached for his wallet, a small photograph slipped out. 5 children huddled around a cake, candles lit, their faces glowing with joy. "Beautiful family," she said softly, handing it back. He nodded, the warmth in his eyes dimming a little. "Yeah. They keep me going." There was a pause, one of those rare silences that aren't empty but full. The kind that hums with unspoken understanding. Elena broke it first. "You must be a good dad." "I try," he said. "Most days, I just hope they don't notice when I'm falling apart." The honesty of it struck her like lightning, raw, unguarded, real. She'd met plenty of people who pretended to have perfect lives, but this man wasn't hiding behind anything. He was just trying. After he left, she stood by the window, watching him hoist Lily into his truck. The child giggled, her small hands clutching his jacket. Elena pressed her palm against the glass, feeling something unfamiliar stir in her chest. It wasn't envy. It was longing, the kind that whispered, maybe there's still more for me than loss. A few days later, the bakery bell chimed again. This time, Daniel came alone. "Thought I'd return the favor," he said, setting down a steaming thermos. "Coffee. My turn to offer kindness." Elena laughed, genuinely. "That's fair. But I warn you, my coffee standards are high." "Then I'll brace myself for judgment," he said, grinning. They shared coffee and small talk, the kind that stretches easily into something deeper without meaning to. He told her about his job, how he worked with his hands, how the noise of machinery was easier to bear than the quiet at home once the kids were asleep. She told him about baking, how the smell of fresh bread reminded her of safety, how she'd once dreamed of having a little cafe attached to her house. Neither of them mentioned what they'd lost. But it hung there, between sentences, like a ghost they both recognized. The rain had stopped by the time he stood to leave. "I'll see you around?" he asked, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Probably tomorrow," she said with a soft smile. "You seem like a man who eats a lot of bread." He chuckled. 5 kids. Bread doesn't last a day in my house." That evening, as Elena closed the shop, she noticed a car parked nearby Daniel's truck. The hood was up, steam curling into the air. She hesitated, then walked over. "Need help?" she asked. He looked up, wiping his hands. "Just my luck. Of course it dies when I've got the kids with me." From the back seat, 5 curious faces peered out, Lily and her siblings, tired but smiling. Elena waved awkwardly, feeling like an intruder, yet oddly drawn to them. "You're the muffin lady." Lily exclaimed, pressing her face to the window. Elena laughed, warmth flooding her chest. That's me. Daniel exhaled, frustrated. Tow truck's an hour out. Guess we're camping here. Not if you come inside, Elena offered before she could second guess it. The bakery's closed, but I can make hot chocolate. It'll be warmer than sitting out here. He looked at her, surprised and maybe a little moved. Are you sure? Absolutely. I've got enough sugar to fuel a small army. He hesitated, then nodded. Kids, grab your stuff. Inside, the bakery filled with laughter. The children crowded around a table while Elena served steaming mugs topped with whipped cream. Daniel watched them, something tender flickering behind his exhaustion. Elena caught his gaze. They're wonderful, she said. He smiled faintly. Yeah. They save me every day. And then it happened, the spark. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a quiet, invisible shift in the air. Elena, standing behind the counter, saw what love looked like when it wasn't romantic or perfect, just human. And Daniel, watching her laugh with his children, saw what warmth looked like when it came from someone who understood emptiness. When the tow truck finally arrived, it was past 9. The kids were yawning, sugar-drunk and happy. Daniel thanked her again, his voice rough with sincerity. Anytime, she said. Really? He paused before walking out, glancing back one last time. You know, you'd make a great mom, he said quietly. The words hit her like a heartbeat, painful and beautiful at once. After they left, Elena stood in the empty bakery, surrounded by half-finished mugs and crumbs of laughter. For the first time in years, she didn't feel barren. She felt alive. For days afterward, Elena couldn't stop thinking about the children's laughter, Daniel's quiet gratitude, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. It had been such a simple evening, but it lingered in her like perfume on her skin. And that was the problem. Every morning, she told herself to stop wondering if they'd come back. Every evening, she caught herself glancing toward the bakery window, waiting for the familiar sound of the bell. It wasn't hope she felt, not exactly, it was fear disguised as longing. She had built her life carefully, like a fragile house of cards. Any touch, any feeling, could bring it all tumbling down. She had already lost once. She couldn't bear to lose again. So she did what she'd always done when something hurt, she hid behind control. She worked longer hours, baked more bread than she could sell, filled her silence with motion. But the hollowness followed her home, curling beside her like a ghost. Meanwhile, Daniel told himself he didn't have time to think about her. Between work, school drop-offs, and endless laundry, his days were a blur of exhaustion. Still, every time he passed the bakery, he slowed down just enough to glance inside. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of her through the window, hair tied up, face illuminated by the glow of the oven. It made something inside him ache, something that had been asleep for a very long time. He hated that feeling. Love had already proven itself dangerous. It had taken his wife from him, left him broken with 5 grieving children and a house too quiet at night. He couldn't risk that again, not for anyone. Dad, Lily said one evening as he tucked her in, are we going to see the muffin lady again? Daniel smiled softly. Maybe. Can we? I liked her. He hesitated. We'll see. But when Lily fell asleep, he sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, realizing that, we'll see, meant I wanted to, but I don't know how to let myself. A week passed before their paths crossed again. Elena was closing up shop when the door opened, and there he was, rain-soaked again, holding a small paper bag. I think you left this in the truck, he said, setting it on the counter. She blinked in surprise. What is it? He shrugged. A spatula. My kids found it after that night. I figured it belonged here. She picked it up, smiling faintly. Thank you. You didn't have to go out of your way. I was driving by, he said, but even as he said it, they both knew he wasn't. The silence stretched. The air between them had changed heavier now, charged with something that neither of them knew how to name. "Your kids," she said, finally. "They're good kids." "Yeah," he said quietly. "They are. But they miss their mother. I can't be that for them." Her heart twisted. "You're doing more than most would." He looked up at her then, eyes tired but searching. "And you? You ever think about starting again?" The question startled her. Starting what? Family. Life. Anything. She hesitated, her throat tightening. "That's not really an option for me." He frowned. "Because of?" "Because it hurts too much to want it," she said softly. For a moment, the air felt still, sacred. Two broken truths hanging side by side. Then Daniel cleared his throat, stepping back, retreating behind the safety of distance. "Sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "It's okay," she murmured. "You just caught me off guard." He nodded, offered a faint smile, and left. The bell jingled behind him, a small, hollow sound that seemed to echo long after he was gone. That night, Elena sat in her kitchen, the spatula on the table before her. A meaningless object, and yet it carried so much weight. She turned it over in her hands, thinking about how easily she'd let that small connection bloom and how quickly she'd pulled away the moment it felt real. Maybe Mark was right, she thought bitterly. Maybe she wasn't built for love. But then she remembered Lily's laughter, Daniel's weary kindness, the chaos of that night, and she knew it wasn't that she wasn't built for love. It was that love had to find her in a different way this time. Still, the idea terrified her. So when the bell above the bakery door chimed again 2 days later, she didn't look up. She just said, "We're closed." From the doorway came a quiet voice, "Even for me?" Her head jerked up. Daniel stood there, holding a tray of fresh coffee and a shy smile. "I brought truce. I figured you might need caffeine more than space." She should have sent him away. She should have told him not to blur lines, not to make this harder. But instead, she sighed, half exasperated, half grateful, and unlocked the door. "Fine," she said, her tone lighter than she felt. "But you're making a habit of showing up when I'm least prepared." He grinned. "Guess that makes us even." They shared coffee in silence, both pretending it was casual. But every stolen glance, every hesitant word, built tension between them, not the kind that demanded touch, but the kind that demanded truth. Neither spoke of what was happening. Neither was ready to name it. But both knew something fragile had begun, and both were equally afraid of breaking it. By the time he left, the streetlights had flickered on, casting soft halos across the wet pavement. Elena locked the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart beating too fast. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of being alone. She was afraid of not being alone anymore. The first frost came early that year, crisping the edges of fallen leaves and turning the town's morning silver. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and warmth, Elena's quiet rebellion against the cold. She was kneading dough when her phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, it's Daniel. Sorry to bother you. I got your number from the receipt book. I think I left my wallet there yesterday when I grabbed coffee." Elena smiled, half amused, half skeptical. She would have noticed a wallet. Still, she checked behind the counter, under napkins and trays. Nothing. No wallet here. "Sure you didn't misplace it in one of your kids' backpacks?" His reply came quickly. "Wouldn't be the first time. Mind if I stop by and double-check?" She hesitated, glancing at the clock. The morning rush had just ended. "Sure," she typed back before she could overthink it. 20 minutes later, Daniel appeared in the doorway, bundled in a worn jacket, his cheeks red from the cold. "Sorry again," he said, stepping inside. My kids swear they didn't touch it. Elena handed him a cup of coffee automatically. You look like you could use this more than your wallet. He accepted it with a grateful smile. You're not wrong. As he searched the counter and shelves, a little voice called from outside. Dad. Daniel turned just in time for Lily to burst in, clutching a coloring book. You left me in the truck again. I told you I'd be right back, he sighed, ruffling her hair. Elena couldn't help but laugh. Come here, sweetheart. Want to help me make cookies? Within minutes, Lily was perched on a stool, covered in flour, beaming. Daniel watched, something soft and wary in his expression. She's really good with you, he said quietly. Elena shrugged, blinking back emotion. I used to babysit a lot. Kids like baking, it makes them feel safe. He nodded. Safe's hard to come by sometimes. They fell into an easy rhythm, Lily stirring, Elena guiding, Daniel pretending not to be in the way. It felt oddly natural, too natural. When Lily announced she wanted to bring cookies home for her siblings, Elena packed them into a paper bag with care. As they left, Daniel said, I owe you for this. She hasn't smiled like that in a long time. Elena smiled faintly. Then don't owe me. Just bring her by again sometime. That sometime came sooner than she expected. 2 nights later, a snowstorm rolled in thick flakes swirling under the streetlights. Elena had just flipped the sign to closed when headlights swept across her window. Daniel's truck pulled up, its tires skidding slightly on the ice. He jumped out, breath clouding in the air. Elena. I'm sorry we lost power at home. The kids are freezing. The roads are getting bad. I didn't know where else to go. She didn't hesitate. Get them inside. Within minutes, the bakery was alive with the sound of children again, 5 bundled shapes shedding coats and scarves, chattering through the cold. Elena turned on the ovens, made cocoa, and gathered every blanket she owned. The space is filled with warmth, both literal and emotional. Daniel stood by the door, looking guilty. I hate imposing. You're not imposing, she interrupted. You're surviving. The words silenced him. He watched her move, calm, capable, kind, and something inside him shifted. This wasn't a pity. This was care. Real, quiet, steady care. The kids curled up near the heater, drowsy from sugar and exhaustion. Elena handed Daniel a mug of cocoa and sat across from him at the counter. Outside, the storm howled against the windows, but inside, it was safe. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. Do you ever think how weird it is how life throws people together like this? Elena smiled faintly. Weird, yes. But maybe not an accident. They sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that says everything words can't. Finally, he said, when Anna died, people stopped calling after a while. They thought giving me space was kindness. I thought so too. But space just made the silence louder. Elena looked down at her hands. I know what that's like. Everyone stopped talking to me after Mark left. Like my barrenness was contagious. Daniel looked up, startled by her honesty. I'm sorry. She shrugged. Don't be. It taught me what real loneliness